The stain was gone, but Tae-jin could still feel it burning. That day, the black waitress, the trembling hands, the hot coffee spilling across his pristine white shirt, everyone else saw an accident. But Tae-jin, he felt something else. Something dangerous. Now, standing alone in his penthouse, that same white shirt clinging to his frame, his phone buzzes. One message. Unknown number. He opens it, and everything inside him goes still. Do you know who she really is? Attached a file. A name. A past buried in blood. Amara Funanya. The woman who softened a Mafia King's heart. Is the daughter of the man his family destroyed. Suddenly, the stain doesn't feel like coffee anymore. It feels like a mark. A warning. A curse he can't wash away. And as another message appears on his screen. 48 hours, or I expose everything. Tae-jin realizes one terrifying truth. This wasn't an accident. He didn't just meet Amara. He was led to her. And now, loving her might cost him everything. The heavy steel door of the Kang family archives groaned, a sound of shifting tectonic plates that echoed through the subterranean silence. Tae-jin stepped into the tomb of his ancestors' secrets, the air thick with the scent of ozone and aging paper. This wasn't a place for the public-facing CEO. It was a sanctuary for the Mafia King. His black undercut was perfectly slicked, but the pulse in his tattooed neck betrayed the storm brewing beneath his calm exterior. He walked past rows of floor-to-ceiling shelves, his leather shoes clicking rhythmically on the polished stone. He wasn't looking for ledgers or stock options. He was looking for the DD file, a name that, until 6 hours ago, he had only known as a footnote in a decade-old corporate acquisition. Now, that name was a tether to the woman currently waiting for him at home with a smile that made him forget his own darkness. Tae-jin reached the restricted vault at the very back of the room. With a steady hand, he entered a biometric code and pulled a weathered, crimson folder from the shadows. The label read, Project 44, Funanya Didi. As he flipped it open, the fluorescent lights overhead hummed like a warning. Inside were grainy surveillance photos of a man who looked strikingly like Amara. The same defiant tilt of the chin, the same warmth in the eyes that even a black and white lens couldn't fully extinguish. Tae-jin's grip tightened, the paper crinkling under his thumb. The documents didn't describe a rival mafia boss. They described a brilliant entrepreneur who had refused to sell his soul, or his land, to the Kang global machine. The memos were cold and clinical, written by his father's hand. They detailed a systematic dismantling, the freezing of assets, the planting of evidence, and finally, the final solution to remove the DD obstacle. Tae-jin felt a sickening drop in his stomach. The empire he sat upon hadn't just outcompete Funanya Didi. It had devoured him, leaving his daughter to grow up in the shadow of a lie. Amara wasn't just a girl he'd met by chance in a coffee shop. She was the living legacy of his family's greatest sin. So it's true. A voice echoed from the doorway. Tae-jin didn't turn. He knew the silhouette of his cousin, Kang Tae-jin, without looking. Our fathers didn't just build a kingdom, cousin, the other man said, his voice dripping with cynical pragmatism. They built it on the bones of men like Didi. If she finds out, or if the board finds out you're sleeping with the daughter of our most high-profile victim, the Heartless King won't just lose his crown. He'll lose his head. Tae-jin closed the file, the sound like a gunshot in the quiet room. He tucked it under his arm, his eyes turning to black ice. Then I suggest, Tae-jin whispered, his voice dangerously low, that nobody tells her until I decide how this story ends. Tae-jin just found out that the person he loved was the child of the person his family destroyed. Do you think he would tell them the truth and break the love, or keep the secret to protect her? Stay with me, let's find out. But before then, kindly subscribe if you haven't. Like and comment. Tell me in the comments, truth or protection? Back to the story. The heavy scent of old paper and betrayal lingered as Tae-jin stepped out of the vault, the crimson DD file tucked like a concealed weapon against his ribs. The hallway of the Kang family estate was a gauntlet of shadows, and at the end of it stood his cousin, a mirror image of his own ambition but polished with a different kind of cruelty. They shared the same name, Kang Tae-jin, but while the ML ruled with a heart of black ice, his cousin moved with the slippery grace of a serpent in the grass. The cousin leaned against a marble pillar, spinning a silver lighter between his fingers. The metallic click-clack was the only sound in the oppressive silence. "You were in there a long time," the cousin remarked, his voice smooth, devoid of the gravelly authority that defined the Mafia King. "Long enough for the board to hold an emergency session without their chairman." Tae-jin didn't break his stride, his leather shoes striking the floor with predatory precision. "The board breathes when I allow it. Not before. They used to believe that," the cousin said, pushing off the pillar to intercept him. "But lately, the king has been distracted. A certain waitress in a yellow dress has made you accessible. And in our world, accessibility is just another word for a target." He stepped into Tae-jin's personal space, his eyes scanning the sharp line of the ML's tattooed jaw. "They're whispering, cousin, about the coffee spilled on a white shirt and the man who didn't spill blood in return. They think you've gone soft. And now, with Soo-jin whispering in the right ears about Amara's father, the whispers are turning into a roar." Tae-jin stopped, his posture shifting into something possessive and lethal. He gripped his cousin's collar, the fabric bunching in his powerful fist. "The board is a collection of old men who fear their own shadows. If they want to roar, let them. I'll be the one to pull their teeth." "It's not just the old men," the cousin whispered, unfazed by the display of dominance. "It's the legacy. If you bring the daughter of Funanya Didi into this house, you aren't just bringing a lover. You're bringing the evidence of our father's crimes. The board won't see a romance. They'll see a liability that needs to be liquidated." He patted Tae-jin's arm, a gesture that felt more like a threat than a comfort. "Fix this, King, or the board will find a Kang Tae-jin who doesn't have a heart to get in the way." Tae-jin shoved his cousin back, his eyes flashing with the cold boss energy that had kept him on the throne for a decade. "I am the law in this city. Tell the board that if they mention her name again, I won't just fire them. I'll bury them." He turned away, the Didi file a heavy weight in his hand, knowing the shadow of his cousin was only the beginning of the war to come. The sliding glass doors of the Kang global headquarters hissed open, admitting a gust of warm city air and a sudden, defiant splash of color. Amara stepped into the lobby, her sleeveless yellow dress glowing like a captured sunbeam against the sterile, obsidian and chrome interior. She held a simple white paper shopping bag in one hand, her long braids swaying gently against her shoulders as she paused to take in the sheer, intimidating scale of Tae-jin's world. Around her, the black ice energy of the corporate hive hummed with clinical efficiency. Sharp-suited executives and stone-faced security guards moved like pieces on a chessboard, their eyes cold and focused on the next move. As Amara walked toward the central reception desk, the rhythmic clicking of her sandals seemed to echo too loudly, drawing the startled gazes of the staff. To them, she was a glitch in the system, a vibrant, soft presence in a fortress built on steel and secrets. The receptionist looked up, her professional mask faltering for a fraction of a second as she took in Amara's soft, vulnerable expression. "Can I help you, miss?" the woman asked, her tone clipped and wary. "I'm here to see Kang Tae-jin," Amara said, her voice steady despite the flutter of nerves in her chest. She lifted the shopping bag slightly. "I brought him lunch. He forgot to eat this morning." A ripple of hushed whispers broke out among the nearby office workers. In the history of Kang Global, no one had ever dared to show up unannounced with a simple gesture for the king. Especially not a woman who looked like she belonged in a sun-drenched cafe rather than a den of vipers. The security team began to shift, their hands moving toward their earpieces, sensing the shift in the atmosphere. Amara didn't flinch. Her emotional boldness was a quiet flame that refused to be extinguished by the cold stares of the elite. She stood her ground in the center of the vast, echoing lobby, a slim figure in yellow who looked entirely out of place, yet strangely like she was the only real thing in the room. Suddenly, the private elevator at the far end of the hall chimed. The crowd parted like a dark sea as Tae-jin stepped out, his muscular frame draped in a fresh white shirt, his slicked-back undercut and visible tattoos marking him as the apex predator of this environment. His gaze swept the room with its usual black ice intensity, looking for a threat, until it landed on the woman in the yellow dress. The air in the lobby seemed to thin. For a long, heart-stopping moment, the Mafia King simply stared at the waitress, the Didi file still heavy in his mind, while the entire office watched in breathless disbelief to see if he would cast her out or pull her into the storm. The elevator doors had barely closed behind Amara when a different kind of chill permeated the lobby. It wasn't the clean, professional cold of the corporate staff, but a toxic, artificial frost. The click of designer stilettos signaled the arrival of Soo-jin. She moved through the space like a predator who owned the territory, her sharp features framed by a sleek bob and a suit that cost more than a waitress made in a year. Tae-jin stood his ground, his hand still warm from where he had briefly touched Amara's arm to guide her toward his private lift. He watched Soo-jin approach, his expression returning to the black ice mask that had earned him his reputation. The muscular tension in his shoulders was visible beneath his white shirt, his tattoos appearing like dark warnings against his skin. "You've always had a flair for the dramatic, Tae-jin," Soo-jin purred, stopping just inches from him. She didn't look at the office workers who were scurrying away. She only had eyes for the king. A waitress? In a yellow dress? It's almost poetic. The king and the commoner. But we both know that yellow is the color of cowardice, isn't it? Tae-jin's voice was a low growl. "You're trespassing, Soo-jin. State your business before I have security treat you like the trash you're acting like." Soo-jin laughed, a sharp, jarring sound. She leaned in, her voice dropping to a lethal whisper that only he could hear. "I've seen the archives, Tae-jin. I know about the Didi file. I know that the girl you're currently hiding in your office is the daughter of the man your father bled dry and buried. It's a beautiful blood debt, isn't it? One that the board would find unforgivable." Tae-jin didn't flinch, but his eyes darkened until they were obsidian. The possessive grip he held on his own temper was the only thing keeping him from ending her right there. "Here is the ultimatum," she continued, tapping a manicured nail against his chest. "You have 24 hours. You will dump the waitress. You will humiliate her publicly so that she never dares to show her face in this city again. Do that, and the Didi secret stays in the vault. Refuse, and I leak the entire blood debt to the press and the rival families. You'll be a king without a crown, standing on the ruins of a legacy you were too weak to protect." She backed away, a triumphant smirk playing on her lips. "Tick-tock, Tae-jin. Choose your throne or your little sunbeam. You can't have both." Tae-jin watched her walk away, his jaw locked in a silent roar. The Heartless king was being forced to make a choice he had spent his whole life avoiding, and the stakes were no longer just power. They were the only light he had ever known. Soo-jin just gave him 24 hours to ruin Amara or lose his crown. Do you think a man like Tae-jin is capable of choosing a woman over his life's work? Let me know your thought. The city of Seoul glittered below them like a carpet of fallen stars, cold and indifferent to the turmoil in Tae-jin's chest. He had driven Amara to a secluded overlook high above the Han River, a place where the wind howled through the steel railings and the air felt thin, as if it were preparing for a storm. Beside him, Amara leaned against the hood of the car, her yellow dress whipping around her legs. She looked like a flicker of fire in a world of shadows, her expression soft as she watched the distant lights. Tae-jin didn't look at the view. He looked at her, his hands shoved deep into his pockets to hide the way they wanted to reach for her. "Amara," he began, his voice rough, cutting through the silence like a blade. "I didn't bring you here to watch the city. I brought you here because the man I am, the man you think you know, is built on the ruins of your own life." She turned toward him, her long braids catching the moonlight. The vulnerability in her eyes was a physical ache in his chest, but he forced himself to continue. He told her about the Didi file. He spoke of his father's clinical cruelty and the systematic destruction of Funanya Didi's dreams to pave the way for Kang Global. He didn't offer excuses. He laid out the blood debt in all its ugly, corporate detail, admitting that the empire he wore like armor was forged from the very legacy that should have been hers. "Soo-jin knows," he whispered, stepping closer until he could smell the faint scent of vanilla and coffee that always followed her. She's given me an ultimatum. She wants me to discard you, to humiliate you, or she will tell the world that the Mafia King is sleeping with the daughter of his family's greatest victim. She thinks that by telling you this, I'm giving you a reason to hate me. He braced himself, expecting her to recoil, to scream, or to simply walk away into the darkness. He was a monster who lived in a house built on her father's bones, and he was ready to let her go if it meant she could be free of his shadow. But Amara didn't move. She stood her ground, her slim silhouette steady against the wind. Her expression wasn't one of terror, but of a quiet, burning boldness that shocked him more than any threat Soo-jin could devise. "You expect me to run, don't you?" she asked, her voice low and melodic. "You think I'm as fragile as the porcelain I break at the cafe?" She reached out, her hand resting against his tattooed neck, her touch warm against his black ice skin. "My father was a man of honor, Tae-jin, and he would have hated the man who took his life. But he wouldn't want me to run from the man who is trying to change the ending of the story." The wind on the overlook seemed to die down, silenced by the steady clarity in Amara's voice. Tae-jin stared at her, his hands still trembling with the phantom weight of the DD file, but she didn't pull away. Instead, she stepped into his space, her braids brushing against the sharp lapels of his white shirt. She looked up at the Mafia King not as a subject, but as an equal who had finally seen the man behind the crown. "You think this story ends with me running away in tears," she said, her fingers grazing the dark ink on his neck. "You think because my father was a victim of your family's greed, I have to be a victim of your family's fear. But I didn't choose that past, Tae-jin, and I won't let Soo-jin or your board use my name to make you a coward." Tae-jin felt the black ice around his heart crack further. He had spent his life believing that power was a shield you built alone, but the woman in the yellow dress was showing him a different kind of strength, one that didn't require a gun or a ledger. "They will tear you apart, Amara," he warned, his voice a low, pained rasp. "If we stand together, they will drag your name through the mud. They will call you a traitor to your father's memory." "Let them," she countered, her eyes flashing with an emotional boldness that burned brighter than the city lights below. "My father lived for the truth. He died because he wouldn't compromise. If I walk away now because I'm afraid of a scandal, I'm the one betraying him, not you. The only way Soo-jin wins is if we stay in the shadows where she thinks we belong." She took his large, tattooed hand in hers, forcing him to look at the contrast of their skin in the moonlight. "Stop trying to protect me by hiding me. If you're the king of this city, then act like it. Don't dump me to save your throne. Use your throne to tell them that I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." Tae-jin's grip tightened on her fingers, his possessive energy shifting from a desperate fear of loss to a cold, focused resolve. The heartless boss was gone, replaced by a man who finally understood that his greatest weapon wasn't his family's blood-soaked legacy, but the woman who refused to be broken by it. "You're right," he whispered, his forehead dropping to rest against hers. "No more hiding. If they want a scandal, I'll give them one they'll never forget." The descent from the overlook was silent, but the air inside the car hummed with a newfound, lethal electricity. Tae-jin gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles white against the dark leather, as the city lights of Seoul rushed toward them like a blurred neon battlefield. For years, he had operated in the shadows, believing that his power was a result of what he kept hidden. He had lived by the Mafia's oldest rule: silence is survival. But as he glanced at Amara, her profile steady, her yellow dress a defiant flag in the dark, he realized that the rules were designed to keep him a prisoner of his own history. Soo-jin expected him to play the game. She expected him to grovel, to negotiate, or to retreat into the cold, clinical distance of the heartless king. She thought she could use the truth as a cage. "They expect me to bury this," Tae-jin whispered, his voice vibrating with a dark, possessive intensity. "They expect me to choose between the crown and the woman who makes the crown worth wearing." Amara looked at him, her braids catching the flickering streetlights. "And what are you going to choose, Tae-jin?" "I'm going to burn the cage," he replied, his eyes turning to black ice. He didn't head for his penthouse or safe house. Instead, he began making calls, not to his cleaners or his enforcers, but to his head of communications and the senior directors of Kang Global. He ordered an emergency press briefing in the main lobby for the following morning. He bypassed the board's protocols, ignoring the frantic pings from his cousin's encrypted line. Every instinct he had developed as a Mafia King screamed at him to stay quiet, to settle the blood debt with a bullet in the dark. But a bullet wouldn't save Amara's dignity, and it wouldn't heal the legacy of Funanya Didi. He realized that secrecy was the only thing giving Soo-jin power. By holding the truth over his head, she owned him. But if he stepped into the light, if he took the weapon out of her hand and turned it on the world himself, she would have nothing left but smoke. Tomorrow, Tae-jin said as they pulled into the shadows of the corporate headquarters, everyone will know who you are. Not as a victim, and not as a secret. They will see you as the woman the king of Seoul isn't afraid to kneel for. He reached over, his thumb tracing the line of her jaw with a grip that was both firm and protective. He was done playing by the rules of dead men. If his empire was built on a lie, he would set it on fire and build a new one on the truth of the woman beside him. The king's gambit wasn't a move to save his throne, it was a move to redefine it. The air in the Kang Global lobby was thick enough to choke on. Word of the emergency briefing had spread like wildfire, drawing every sharp-suited executive and gossiping in turn to the polished obsidian floor. In the center of the vast, modern cathedral of power, the Black Ice King stood waiting. Tae-jin looked every bit the dominant predator, his muscular frame draped in a pristine white shirt, his slicked-back undercut, and the dark tattoos creeping up his neck marking him as a man who lived by his own rules. When the elevator chimed, a collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Amara stepped out, her yellow sleeveless dress a brilliant, defiant sunbeam against the monochrome corporate backdrop. She looked soft, her long braids framing a face that held a quiet, emotional boldness, but the shopping bag in her hand was a reminder of the ordinary world she represented. The world Tae-jin was supposedly too heartless to inhabit. From the balcony above, Soo-jin watched with a triumphant sneer, her phone already poised to trigger the leak of the Didi blood debt. She expected a cold dismissal. She expected Tae-jin to play the part of the ruthless CEO protecting his throne. Instead, Tae-jin moved. He didn't walk. He stalked toward Amara with a possessive, controlled energy that made the security guards freeze. When he reached her, he didn't whisper a goodbye or offer a clinical handshake. His large, tattooed hand moved with a firm, claiming grip, sliding into her braids and cupping the back of her head. With a low, guttural sound that vibrated through the silent lobby, he pulled her into him. The kiss was intense, a collision of passion and power that shattered every corporate protocol. Amara leaned in willingly, her hands clutching the crisp fabric of his shirt as the Mafia King claimed her in front of the world. It was a public declaration of war against his own legacy, a scandalous display of affection that turned the heartless boss into a man who had finally found his heart. A sea of shocked office workers stared in total disbelief. Cameras flashed and phones recorded, but Tae-jin didn't break the contact. He held her as if she were the only thing keeping the world from spinning off its axis. In that moment, the Didi secret didn't feel like a weapon, it felt like ash. By choosing this scandalous, public transparency, he had taken the venom out of Soo-jin's thread and burned the rules of the underworld. When he finally pulled back, his forehead resting against hers, his voice carried through the hushed room. "Let them look," he whispered, his eyes like black ice. "Let them see exactly who you are to me." He actually did it. Tae-jin just claimed her in front of everyone. On a scale of 1 to 10, how shocked are the office workers right now? And honestly, how loud did you just scream? The silence that followed the kiss was more devastating than any physical blow Tae-jin had ever dealt. On the marble balcony overlooking the lobby, Soo-jin stood frozen, her thumb hovering over the send button on her phone. She had prepared a digital execution, a calculated strike intended to make Tae-jin grovel for his crown. But as the flashes of a dozen office smartphones captured the king's public defiance, she realized the weapon in her hand had turned to ash. Tae-jin slowly broke the kiss, his powerful grip lingering on Amara's waist as he turned his gaze upward. His black eyes locked onto Soo-jin with a predatory clarity that made her step back. He didn't look like a man whose secret had been exposed. He looked like a man who had just set the world on fire and was enjoying the warmth. "The archives are open, Soo-jin," Tae-jin's voice boomed, amplified by the stunned acoustics of the hall. "The board, the press, and the families. Everyone now knows the daughter of Funanya Didi is exactly where she belongs. By my side." Soo-jin's face contorted, her polished mask finally shattering. "You've destroyed yourself," she shrieked, her voice cracking. "You've admitted to the sins of your father. The board will never let a man with such a liability lead. The board follows the man who isn't afraid of the dark." Tae-jin cut her off, his tone dropping to a lethal, quiet rasp. "You thought the truth was a cage. I used it as a torch. You have nothing left to whisper, Soo-jin. No secrets, no leverage, and after this morning, no seat at my table." He gestured curtly to the security team. Two stone-faced guards, who only moments ago had been unsure of their loyalty, moved instantly toward the balcony. They didn't hesitate. The power dynamic had shifted the second Tae-jin stopped hiding. "Wait." Soo-jin gasped as a guard gripped her arm, her designer bag falling to the floor. "Tae-jin, I was trying to save the legacy. You were trying to own it," he countered, stepping closer to Amara, as if to shield her from the very sight of the woman. "You are stripped of your holdings and your title. You are exiled from the inner circle. If I see your face in this building or this city again, I won't be using a press conference to handle you." The lobby watched in grim fascination as the serpent was dragged toward the rear exits, her frantic protests fading into the hum of the air conditioning. Tae-jin looked down at Amara, his expression softening just enough for her to see the man beneath the tattoos. The blackmail was dead, and for the first time in his life, the king was truly free. The storm had passed, leaving the city of Seoul washed in a fragile, neon-tinted clarity. High above the streets that had once trembled at his name, Tae-jin stood on the glass-rimmed edge of his penthouse balcony. The cold, black ice wind of the heights still swirled around him, but it no longer bit into his skin. His white dress shirt was unbuttoned at the collar, exposing the dark tattoos that climbed his neck, marks of a past he no longer had to carry in the dark. Beside him, Amara leaned against the railing, her yellow dress a soft, golden flicker against the midnight blue of the skyline. The silence between them wasn't the heavy, suffocating quiet of the archives or the tense standoff of the lobby. It was the peaceful stillness of a war that had finally been won. "They're calling it the lobby revolution on the news," Amara said softly, her voice melodic and steady. She looked out at the sprawling empire below, her braids caught in the gentle breeze. "The board is in shambles, and Soo-jin is gone. You dismantled everything you spent a decade building in less than an hour." Tae-jin stepped closer, his muscular frame casting a protective shadow over her. He reached out, his firm, possessive grip settling on her waist, pulling her flush against his side. "I didn't dismantle an empire, Amara. I burned a mausoleum." He looked down at her, his eyes, once described as heartless, now reflecting a profound, grounded warmth. "I spent 13 years ruling through fear because I thought love was a weapon my enemies would use to bleed me. I was wrong. Loving you was the only thing that made me powerful enough to tell the truth." He thought of the Didi file, now reduced to ash in his office fireplace. The blood debt was settled, not with more violence, but with the radical act of choosing the daughter of his enemy as his queen. He was still the king of Seoul, still the dominant force that kept the city in check, but the heartless boss had been replaced by a leader who led with his soul exposed. Amara turned in his arms, resting her hands against his chest, her touch a constant reminder of the life he had almost thrown away. "What happens now?" she asked, her expression bold and filled with hope. Tae-jin leaned down, his forehead resting against hers as the city glittered indifferently below. "Now, we build something that isn't founded on secrets. A new empire. One where a waitress can spill coffee on a king and stay to see him smile. He kissed her then, a slow, deep seal of their shared future. The heartless boss was gone, and in his place stood a man finally at peace with his heart, ready to rule the dawn. The heartless king finally has a heart. But do you think the board is really going to let them live in peace? Or is this just the beginning of a bigger war? What should happen in Season 2? If you've made it this far, you're not just watching a story, you're feeling the weight of it. You're someone who believes that even the coldest hearts can melt and that the truth is worth the fire. You will agree with me that truth is the ultimate neutralizer. When you own your story, your enemies lose their weapons. That vulnerability isn't a weakness. It's the highest form of strength. We are not defined by our ancestors' sins, but by the courage we find to stand beside those we love. Together, they prove that even the darkest histories can be rewritten by a single, defiant act of love. Thank you for walking through the black ice with me. You're the reason this story has a heartbeat. Subscribe to this channel and watch more intriguing Afro-Korean mafia love stories. I give you my purple heart. Take care of yours. Cheers.